This is the story of life today in a little village on the bleak Northumbrian coast, from which, as from so many others of its kind, all the young men have vanished, leaving their little boats, to serve in men of war, in minesweepers and merchantmen. It's the story of the fathers and mothers, the wives and sweethearts left behind. Elderly people, most of them, some quite old. A story of their gallant struggle to carry on in spite of all the perils and handicaps war has brought. It's a very old village, centuries old, solid and dour, defying the elements like the people who live in it, and contrasting strangely with the streets of miners' cottages which have sprung up cheek by jowl with it during the mere yesterdays of the last 50 years. Age has mellowed and beautified the cold austerity of its flint and granite, and it's full of queer nooks and corners, of narrow lanes and alleys with vistas of the sea, and quaint backyards in which may be discovered at almost any time of the day interesting little cameos of the daily life of its people. There's no age limit for workers here, and no idlers. Old men who might well be smoking their pipes in peace carry on with the normal work of their absent sons, and the women of the community, who have been accustomed all their lives to shouldering a pretty big share of the work, now do their bit and a good bit over. Quite old ladies still walk miles every day with a heavy creel on their backs to carry fish to distant villages, and everybody takes a hand at the interminable business of baiting lines. Fish are caught here not by netting but by lines, each 700 yards long, with a hook every yard or so, and only one sort of bait will do. All the fish in the North Sea, worth catching, refuse to be tempted by anything except a nice fresh mussel, 2 mussels for preference, and the mussel supply is the great problem. They're gathered from the rocky foreshore, but, strangely enough, have to be put there first. You must put before you can take. Mussels, you see, are not native to this part of the coast. They will live here, but not if they can help it, and not for long. They thrive and breed only in a certain mixture of salt water and fresh, such as may be found at the mouths of rivers. So all the mussels used here for bait have to be imported from distant places in ton lots at considerable expense. Each fishing family has its own special mussel dump out on the rocky foreshore, where the poor things can be covered by the tide most of the 24 hours and forget their troubles. But looking after the mussels, weeding out the homesick ones and so on is quite a job. If you've ever eaten a homesick mussel, you'll appreciate how important a job this is. Having been carried all the way down to the foreshore, they have of course to be carried all the way back, and in these days, even poor old Grandpa has to do his bit of bait gathering. Each boat takes out 4 of these lines, and that means, when only half a dozen boats are going out daily, that somebody has to bait more than 16,000 hooks every day. The preparation of the lines is a job for experts only. Every hook must be examined and retied if necessary. Every one must be carefully covered. And as for extracting the mussels from their shells, well, it may look easy, but buy a dozen, if you can, and try it. You'll find it a lot harder than shelling peas. The women do most of this work, and it's by no means as simple a job as they make it look, but they are incredibly quick and expert. The most vital part is the way the line is coiled. Every loop and every hook must be laid just so, else that mass of mussels won't pay out properly. These little fishing boats, driven by very low-power motors, go out at dawn in the summer, and long before it these days, for 5 or 6 miles as a rule, sometimes a lot further. They go, in fact, just where the fish are. And these fishermen know far more about the movements of fish 20 fathom deep than you know about your next-door neighbor. Every time, of course, they're taking the chance that some Hun raider in the clouds will spot them. And what would happen if one did needs no guessing. There are no blank days, no empty bags in this kind of fishing, but catches vary a good deal in character and in weight. Turbot, cod, haddock, skate, ling, plaice, sole, whiting, all of these fall for a nice tasty mussel sometime or other. It's not a great catch today. There are too many gaps in the line. A really big catch means a fish on almost every hook, and it not only can happen, but often does. The record catch is more than 400 pounds of fish on one of these 700-yard lines. That's fish. When the lines have all been hauled, there are the lobster pots, which were dropped yesterday to be lifted. A good deal nearer home. These pots are constructed on the same lines as the old-fashioned fly trap, but lobsters and crabs haven't any sense either, and have never been known to find their way out once they get in. When the pots are cleared and rebaited with a nice bit of fish, not too fresh for choice, out they go again until tomorrow. If there's anything like a glut of lobsters, those not wanted for today's market have their claws tied, possibly to stop them scratching their heads because they'll have plenty to worry about presently, and they're packed in boxes and dumped overboard, carefully buoyed. And this is called riding the lobsters. The next ride they get will be their last, and the next water they see, hot water. When the boats begin to come in, between 10 and 11 in the morning as a rule, a busy time is had by all except the fishermen themselves. They can go off and get their breakfast. A nice bit of fish, perhaps, and perhaps not. If you had been down on the foreshore at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, when the boats were putting off, you would have seen that it was the women who carried down the lines and a lot of the other gear, and it's the women who now carry most of it back again to get those backyards busy on repairs and renewals. It's the women and the girls, too, who carry up most of the fish on these queer contraptions called hand barrows, and it seems to be a pretty good catch today. Everything goes to the open-air market, market day being every day when the boats go out. It begins business when the first catch arrives and continues until the last one has been disposed of. Nowadays, it's not so much a market as an allocation of supplies amongst authorized dealers, and the burning question is not price, but weight. The fish are sorted according to quality, weighed, and packed in boxes, each containing so many stone. In these days of controlled prices, the more common kinds, haddock, cod, whiting, and the like, net the fisherman about 5p a pound. The better qualities a little more. He's making quite a bit of money just now, but he earns every penny of it. And plenty of fish has not always meant plenty of money. There have been lots of times in the past when boatloads have had to be thrown back into the sea for lack of any market at all. The onlookers are mostly a professional crowd, nearly everyone with a personal interest in the catch. What concerns them is not the price, that they know, but the actual weight of fish turned in by their own particular boat. Fine lot of crabs today, completely immobilized, you'll notice, when placed upside down. There is one right and several wrong ways of handling crabs and lobsters. Take a crab gently by the elbow, like this, and it'll go quietly. Lobsters, on the other hand, must be gripped firmly by the waist. And before you start to tie up one claw, take care to put the other in chancery. Pick 'em up right, and they'll know it. Pick 'em up wrong, and you'll know it. Lobsters are a free market, and bidding seems to be brisk for them today. They're going at, what? £0.50 a pound. My word, that's a lot less than you and I have to pay for them in a shop. Before leaving the market, a great deal of the fish has that part of its anatomy removed which is unfit for human consumption. In other words, it is gutted. The gutting shed has quite an atmosphere of its own, But the women who do most of the work might just as well be picking flowers for all the notice they seem to take of it. The offal is not wasted. There are always hundreds of hungry ones waiting and watching for it. Beautiful creatures, gulls, but with no more manners than a pack of vultures when there's food about. On this coast, it's very seldom safe at this time of year to leave these little boats afloat overnight. For big seas that would toss them about like corks are very apt to spring up without warning. So every afternoon, for safety's sake, all of them have to be hauled well above high water mark. It's quite an ingenious operation, with everybody doing their bit, and even the sea itself roped in to help. Now watch how cleverly this two-wheeled carriage, on which the boat will presently be balanced, is maneuvered into position. See how cunningly the incoming waves are used. A series of little lifts from the sea, a few big boosts from half a dozen pairs of hefty shoulders to lever the boat, a good pull at the right moment from those on the ropes, and up she goes. Then it's all hands to the haul. Men, women, boys and girls, even quite little ones. The length of the haul depends, of course, on the state of the tide. It can be a quarter of a mile or more. And if you think that's nothing but good honest fun, you're mistaken a great deal more than somewhat. When all the boats are made safe, everybody can go home. To rest? Oh no. No, no. To the interminable job of tying hooks, opening mussels, baiting lines, tying hooks and opening mussels. For this is a village of no leisure, or so it seems. But there is just one job of work more important than all the rest, the service of the lifeboat. Here, as in hundreds of other places on our coasts, there is always at least one pair of keen and expert eyes scanning the ocean for a ship in distress, for survivors from some torpedoed vessel, or an unlucky airman dumped in the drink. And no matter what the time, the conditions, or the cause, whether it is tying hooks, baiting lines, opening mussels, or bathing the baby, when the Coast Guard signals for the lifeboat, the fishing community comes running, and the women most of all. They always have played their part, and more, whenever the call for the lifeboat has come. But in these days it is upon them that the burden very largely falls of seeing that it is launched without an instant's delay, to add, if possible, to the station's proud record of 392 people rescued from the sea, 14 during the present war. She's a little boat, as lifeboats go, only about 5 tons in weight. But 5 tons can feel like 50 when it has to be dragged through deep sand. On her caterpillar carriage, strong arms and willing hearts do wonders with that lifeboat. And as for pulling one's weight, what a tug-of-war team these ladies could turn out. It's tough work, isn't it? But it's nothing to what has been done. On one wild night in February 1940, when a ship was in dire distress and breaking up rapidly on the rocks north of the headland beyond the ancient church, it was found impossible to get the lifeboat round the point. So they brought her back and hauled her over the headland, up one cliff and down another with a mile of sand dunes in between. And somehow they managed to get her over the rocks and into deep water. And presently every man aboard that shipwrecked vessel was saved. It was a truly wonderful feat, comparable with the greatest in lifeboat history. And of the 45 stalwarts who made that memorable haul, nearly 2/3 were women. Nowadays, the call for the lifeboat may come at any moment, though the sea may be placid as a lake. For in these hazardous times there are many perils other than storm and tempest menacing all at sea. But whenever the call may come, the reply will be instant. For lifeboat, crew, the scores of willing helpers, and all those of the first aid services who cooperate ashore, see to it that this shall be so, by constant rehearsal, each of his or her own part. Practice launch over, the lifeboat is skillfully maneuvered back onto its carriage and hauled up the steep ramp to be safely housed. It's been a long extra spell of real hard work for people whose every day is one of toil, but willingly and cheerfully undertaken, with perhaps a fuller appreciation of its necessity and value than many of us can have. And in case these pleasant pictures of a peaceful bay have been deceptive, come across the headland, past the old church, which for 7 centuries has been a guide to mariners, which once stood in the village, but is now almost out at sea, here where savage seas driven by wild northeasterly gales often roar across the rocky foreshore, where the full effect of an angry ocean is really felt and can clearly be seen. We too may appreciate that grim menace which is ever present to these good fisher folk. And so, as we bid them farewell, let it be with the resolve to offer a more frequent prayer for all those who, forsaking their little boats or other vocations for king and country, have gone down to the sea in ships.